Good evening, everyone, to the crowd gathered. Calling the Town of Hingham Board of Selectmen meeting to order for January 22nd, 2019. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes dated January 15th, 2019.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Public comment for items not on the agenda. Hearing none. Let's move it right to the agenda. 99 Restaurants of Boston. We got anybody? Step into my office.
Do I see somebody in the crowd? It's a long walk.
You have our undivided attention.
Aye.
Well, yeah, sit at the table. It's easier. Okay, and who might you be, kind sir?
John O'Connell.
Okay. Let me start with the last question first. Michelle, is all the paperwork in order here?
Yes, it is.
All right. John. Okay, do my colleagues have any questions of Mr. O'Connell?
Yeah, go ahead, Mary. I was just interested, so you've been there for a little while?
I've worked for the company for 25 years.
Yep.
I've been in this store for about 3.5 to 4 weeks right now.
Okay.
This is my second posting at this store. I've had it 7, 8 years ago. I don't exactly remember the time frame, but I had it for about 2.5 years then.
And post-renovation, how's that working out?
Way better than expected.
Great, good. That was my only question.
Those are my questions, yep. Chief, you're good?
I just have to comment that my sons enjoy your fair, so. And
That's all the more reason to go for this.
they don't usually voice those kind of things, but it seems to be the restaurant they like going to, so. I'll entertain a motion to approve the request of the 99 Restaurants of Boston LLC, DBA 99 Restaurants and Pub, for a change of manager to John R. O'Connell, subject to the approval of the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Appreciate you coming.
Welcome
Thank you.
aboard.
Thank you very
Welcome
much.
back.
See you. You too. Now a hard-hitting one. Transfer station mattress fee. Mr. Sylvester, how are you, sir?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you.
Nice seeing you all.
Good job on the storm.
Thank you.
Tough one, a lot of ice.
Storm, really tough one.
Yeah, we're still out there treating
A lot of
the
ice,
days.
a lot of ice. All right, what do we got?
Well, I'm here to request that we introduce a mattress recycling fee for the mattresses we take at the transfer station. For the last 2 years, we have been recycling on a DEP grant, which also allowed us to buy a container for this purpose. That was a grant for $4,500. And the grant is up the end of this month. And I've looked into several options that are DEP endorsed under their contracts. And I am requesting $20 per mattress or box spring fee put in place to cover those costs. We do about 15 loads a year at a ton of load and an average of 40 mattresses. And if we didn't, we would be incurring a cost of about $17,000, which is not in the budget right now. Matter of fact, recycling, all the recycling materials, that the costs are going up. There's a cost to recycle now. It's not for free anymore.
Questions from my colleagues?
You know, I appreciate that you have the other fees here. I don't think this is burdensome. I think it's helpful that you can actually get rid of a mattress at the transfer station.
I think you put a lot of work into the research on other towns, on the recycling costs, on the cost of the town if we don't do this. And like Mary said, you know, I think you have a couple choices. If you buy a new mattress, they can haul it away for you for a fee. And I think it's reasonable to assess a modest fee for this sort of convenience of disposal at the transfer station. So I appreciate how you package this though, Randy, because it's all the questions that we might have had, you've anticipated.
Public? Nothing? Motion time?
Sure. I'd make a motion to approve the request of the Public Works Department to add a mattress recycling fee of $20 per mattress to the transfer station fee schedule.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye. Thank you,
Thank you
Randy.
very much.
Good luck
Night,
with the rest
Randy.
of the winter.
Yeah.
Don't slip on the way out. Okay. All right. Chief,
We got the wave. Sorry. Good evening.
you're here. Deputy, welcome.
You're welcome.
Deputy to join you?
Sure, if you want to come on up.
Absolutely.
Want his face on TV.
It's a team effort.
Thank you. It is.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as you may recall, last week we had interviews for the position of police lieutenant. So we wanted to kind of ruminate on that a bit. I thought all the individuals who interviewed did an excellent job, reflecting well on the department. So at this point, we're going to hear from the chief and the deputy with respect to their recommendations.
Good evening. As you know, the Hingham Police Department started a new civil service assessment testing process. This is something that the deputy and I had been looking and talking about. We were very happy with the testing process, and we believe that it is a very true and fair representation of the qualifications needed to be a successful lieutenant in the Hingham Police Department. As you know, we've had a series of lieutenants that have been in the provisional position for almost 3 years now. Provisional Lieutenant Richard Cochran and Provisional Lieutenant Dave Petiti have been serving there for 3 years. Their service and leaderships have been extremely exemplary, and they have the same progressive visions that we are promoting within the department. And I think that's, as we move forward into the future, I think that's a needed quality that we have to have. I highly recommend both Provisional Lieutenants Cochran and Petiti for promotion to Permanent Lieutenant. The third Provisional Lieutenant is Darren McAdams. He's been serving in that position for close to 1 year. He's adapted very well to the role, and he's demonstrated his abilities to lead the shift. He has prior experience as a road sergeant and as also in serving in positions as a long-term lieutenant. It's something that he instills confidence in the officer, and he also understands the department's relationship with the community and the modern requirements of policing in the department. And I know you were glad to hear about how we talked about the talk and walk that's going on in the square, and that was something that the deputy and I have talked about as well, and we sort of put a directed order out, and I think it started last week.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I highly recommend Provisional Lieutenant McAdams to the promotion of Permanent Police Lieutenant. Fourth candidate on the list was Detective Sergeant Ryan O'Shea. Sergeant O'Shea has 16 years of experience on the department. He was promoted to detective in October of 2010 and sergeant in June of 2011. Part of our department reorganizational plans that the deputy chief and I have been working on calls for a supervisor in direct control of the detective division. Sergeant O'Shea was chosen to fill this supervisory role. His skills, values, and leadership are welcomed by the detectives, and it's brought about vastly improved case management in the division. Throughout his career, he served in various roles such as CJIS representative, Citizens Police Academy director. He's assisted us with the IMC and QED technology, installing the new computer systems. And he's also part of our evidence oversight group that keeps an eye on the evidence and makes sure that it's properly run. Detective Sergeant O'Shea has a great understanding of technology and shares the visions of the modern Hingham Police Department. I'm very confident in Detective O'Shea has all the requirements to flourish in his role. I highly recommend Detective Sergeant O'Shea for the Permanent Lieutenant's position.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to add, Deputy?
No, I just echo the chief's statement there. I think we're lucky to have such qualified candidates that have such a diverse background to bring their experience and to the department.
I would agree. Comments from my colleagues before we vote?
Well, we were just commenting on this, walking down the stairs, that, I thought it gave the town a great view into the leadership capabilities that you've been cultivating in the department. And as Paul said, when you walked up here, it's really a team effort. And I think those four gentlemen and their service to the department and to the town in what they described for us last week, I thought is indeed exemplary. And, you know, I was really felt privileged to sort of to be part of that interview process.
Thank you.
And I would just add that I appreciate the time that both of you took with me last week to kind of walk me through your staffing plan, how you're seeing that play out in the future. You went to a lot of effort to get a lot of benchmarking data that helped kind of us look at the size of the organization, the ratio of sort of management level positions to police patrol. And also, you know, what it reinforced for me is that what these promotions will allow is to make sure that with every shift there is a lieutenant on duty. And I think that's really important, particularly because of we have so many new policemen and women that having the sergeants available to help out and to lead and to coach is really of great importance. So, you know, as for me, it was helpful to kind of just look at where this is heading, how this fits within town finances, how it allows you to execute the mission of the police department, and so I'm comfortable with that as well.
Thank you.
I won't replow the same ground, but nonetheless, I do appreciate both you, Chief, and you, Deputy, going through this process with me in a way that I found satisfactory and informative. And I'm trying not to be wedded to old concepts and open at the same time to the kind of new challenges that the department faces, you know, in this time. But I also admire your ability for forward thinking here. And I think that the decisions we're making tonight are going to help shape that. So the two of you, I really appreciate how well you work together for the good of the town and for the good of the department. So I hope these permanent positions work out the way we want them to, and add to the already formidable cachet that the department enjoys.
I'm sure it will. Thank you.
Why don't you make this motion?
Thank you. At this time, I'm privileged to make a motion to appoint David A. Petiti, Richard F. Cochran, Ryan P. O'Shea, and Darren M. McAdams as permanent full-time police lieutenants for the town of Hingham.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, congratulations. Good luck to you out there.
Appreciate all your time. Thank you.
Thank you
bet.
very much.
Anytime. All right. Returning to the storage license with the Hingham Maritime Center. I don't see anybody here. Is this? Oh, I apologize profusely. You're welcome to join us at the table.
Michelle's been working with Logan on this, and we'll let her run the show here.
So several weeks ago, the board approved a temporary winter storage license for Hingham Maritime Center to use 308 Cushing Street. And HMC pointed out after that time that the liability insurance requirements under the temporary license agreement were actually higher and more expensive than the insurance requirements under HMC's current lease for their operations at Barnes Wharf. So what's before the board tonight is a draft amendment to amend the temporary winter storage license so that the insurance requirements are in line with the lease. It would be $2 million total so that HMC doesn't have to take out a more expensive policy to cover that use.
Questions?
I'm glad we caught that. I think it was it was not intended, so I'm glad that we caught it.
Motion? Please.
I move that we amend the license to use real estate dated November 27, 2018, between the town and Hingham Maritime Center, Inc. to require insurance coverage consistent with the insurance requirements set forth in the existing lease between the town and Hingham Maritime Center, Inc. for Barnes Wharf.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
We're running a little ahead, so we're gonna do the possible votes on the low, just to fill up the block.
Oh, did you want to take up the three, we have three small articles, if you want to
Okay.
knock those out.
Okay, sure. Article A, seen this before. This is
So we
the-
have our volunteer. So the Hannah Lincoln Whiting Fund article is complete and ready to be considered.
Questions from my colleagues? If not, take a motion.
I move that we recommend Laura Boyle, 22 Westmoreland Road, to be elected a member of the committee to have charge of the income of the Hannah Lincoln Whiting Fund for a 3-year term.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Article C,
This is the article for the reports of the various town committees. If you remember at the last meeting when we were discussing this, there was some question as to which committees did town meeting create, and had they completed their mission and rolled off, et cetera. So what we discovered is that did happen. We had the 2006 building committee for the middle school was still on this list, and we had omitted the 2017 school building committee. So we made those changes, and this list is now comprehensive. I apologize for that. Nice catch, Karen. Thank you. Or
I move,
I'll make a motion to recommend favorable action on Article C.
second.
all's in favor?
Aye.
Unpaid bill of a previous year.
Yeah, this is just a bill that came through late. We never received it. It came in late. This is for our copiers in town. That's the lease for our copiers. We didn't receive the bill, and then by the time the company got around to correcting the error and sending it to us, it was the next fiscal year. So this is the process.
And this is the only bill? There's nothing else from the previous year?
I asked the exact same. The fear is that something else pops up that we
Right.
didn't see.
Right.
So, it's really late at this point. If something like that were to come up, I'd be surprised. Doesn't hurt. If you want to wait a little longer, we can. I don't know that at this point we'll see anything more.
I don't mind waiting. I mean, I guess then the only other way to pay a late bill would be a reserve fund transfer?
We would probably do this process again next year, quite frankly.
Okay.
So,
No, I mean, some incentive for vendors to get their bill in
Yeah,
on time,
right.
right? Yeah, no.
I don't know how you guys feel. We can either do it now or we can do it later. It doesn't matter to me. Just trying to tick these things off.
Get it done?
Yeah.
I don't think we'll get anything else.
I'm not sure if it's this one, but I remember that there is one warrant article that doesn't come up all that often that requires like a 4/5 approval. So, and I'm not sure if it's this one, but I might just ask that we look back and see if it's anything other than a majority vote. It's always a helpful thing to note that.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, there's one that requires 4/5.
Right.
And
Yep.
it's popping in my head, so.
Okay. We'll identify that.
But I'd make a motion to recommend favorable action on Article O.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. 3 more done.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, in terms of this appointment of Ms. Campbell, I take it this is something that's expected and anticipated?
Yeah, so Lisa Campbell is our new HR director with the retirement of David Basler, and this is to have her be the municipal liaison to the Ethics Commission is important. It's a requirement of the town, and our HR director has traditionally been that role. So
Have a motion?
I move that we appoint Lisa Campbell as the municipal liaison to the Ethics Commission for the purpose of training paid and unpaid municipal employees in the conflict of interest law.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it seems like we have weekly liquor license motions here.
May I make a request before we vote on this?
Certainly.
I might request, I know that the community center has had some changes in leadership. I know there are a lot of great, new, exciting things happening, which is terrific.
Right.
I think it might be helpful for this board and for the police chief to get a sense of whether, in particular as it relates to these one-day liquor licenses, whether the the amount of them is going to be any different than it's been in the past.
Okay.
And I just think it might be a good idea to check in so that the chief kind of has a sense of what's happening. I think that, that may affect, putting patrols in the square, et cetera. Again, I'm not opposed to any of these, but I feel like we've approved an awful lot of them. And I also don't know if at a certain point, if there's a certain frequency, is there a limit to the number of these that can happen? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page going forward, so nobody is surprised.
And there, to that point, right, there seems like a mix of events. So it's one thing for folks to be renting out the community center for their one-time, one-day liquor license, right? And then the community center itself, how many one-days can it have before we cross some sort of threshold?
Yes, I just, I don't know if there is a threshold, but I feel like this is a good time to just kind of make sure we're all on the same page.
And I guess to that end too, I feel like I've seen some social media or something for some of these events in advance of them coming to us, and I feel a little funny about that as well. Like,
Sure.
Because then it puts us in that weird spot of like, if we did have concerns about it and it's already out there,
Public pressure to approve
yeah,
in
yeah.
advance.
So,
And
I'll
also,
have that conversation with the
yeah.
new director over there.
And if we had a calendar of events too, we could then make sure that things come to this board and we go through the paperwork well in advance of the time so that, again,
so they can
we want to
advertise it.
work in partnership to make sure these things are successful. So it could help us all.
and I will say, I think that they are being proactive in getting the paperwork in. It's just the tension maybe between paperwork and the need to advertise that.
Yeah.
Putting some pressure on this.
Absolutely. I'm happy to have that conversation.
And I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm not seeing the tip certification for the Night of Africa Community Center fundraiser.
On page 3? Oh, no, that's the evening of tastings. They're sending it in, they haven't got it yet.
They're sending it,
They're sending it in to Sharon,
okay, so they know they need it.
but they have it. They have the certification, they just haven't sent in the paperwork.
I would recommend you take your vote just contingent on our receipt of the tip certification paperwork.
Okay.
Do we have a motion?
And can I ask the deputy a question? To Mary's point, given this additional activity in the square, you haven't sort of just organically noticed any differences in activity level down there, like nothing that's jumping out at you in terms
No,
of a
nothing's coming
concern?
to our attention as far as increases around when they're having events.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We might add that the chief and the deputy have instituted a new practice with respect to patrol, which is going to see a footbeat in some form or another in the Hingham Square, which I think is going to be a welcome addition to the presence of the department by the town, so
Would you like a motion on one of these?
if you'd be so kind.
I would make a motion to approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverages license to Lori Lerner for the Night of Africa fundraiser to be held at the Hingham Community Center on Saturday, February 9th, 2019, from 6:30 p.m. to 10 p.m., subject to the receipt of tip certification
Prior to the event.
prior to the event. Thank you.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next.
I move that we approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverages license to Mary Ann Blackmur for an evening of tastings to be held at the Hingham Community Center on Friday, February 8, 2019, from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. So now we are right on time. We've got all our business done, with the exception of the presentation of this year's Community Preservation Committee recommendations. I believe that's what we're going to hear. So, we've acted on your issue. We're just trying to be efficient. Yeah, I mean, you can stay, but,
Do you want to do selectmen and town administrator reports while we're...
sure, sure.
Oh, sorry.
Nothing from me, thank you.
I'm good. Nothing. Oh, I can speak briefly. We, Michelle and I attended with the advisory committee and Sue Nickerson and Emily Wentworth from Hingham. We attended the Mass Municipal Association's annual conference in Boston at the end of last week. And as always, it was very informative. It's nice to see the trends in the state, around the state, and what the different towns are doing and how they're running their towns, the issues before all the other communities. It's funny how they're all the same. All these communities, all of us are considering the same matters. So anyway, that's nice to see. But nice to see how other people are handling it and get an outside perspective. So that was very helpful. Got a presentation from the governor. So it was nice.
Great. Well, I sort of said it before, but I did want to congratulate Randy and his department for such a fine handling of this first, what I consider a really challenging snowstorm. The conditions and the timing, I think, made it difficult. Police and fire as well, and I appreciate particularly Steve Murphy keeping us informed as to how things were progressing, statewide, but also here on the South Shore. So, you all don't see every person who's involved in this, but there are a lot of people that bring their talents to bear to keep the town safe during these storms.
I'm good.
Two. All right, well, I see various groups coming in right on time. I appreciate the promptness.
Wow, advisory committee, right on time.
So, Tommy, who's joining us
I
at the
see it as a
table?
possible.
The leadership
Carol.
of the CPC.
Carol
And if Donna wants to, Donna and Victor may be over here. Or Bob.
Good evening, how are you tonight? Yeah, I didn't plan to vote on it this meeting.
I just see it as, it was listed, I think, as an option for us, but
Oh, I don't pay any attention to that. All right, good evening, fellow citizens and residents. Thank you all for coming tonight. As some of you have done this before, I'd get right to the point. We're going to have a presentation by the Community Preservation Committee. So I'd invite those that are doing the presenting to come up at the table and let's hear what we have. We're not going to be voting on anything tonight. We're just going to process it and ruminate.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Carol. Hey, Larry.
Thanks.
How you doing? Thank you for coming.
I think you had an issue with that one other time.
Disappear into the sunset.
Trade.
You ready for
Floor
us?
is yours, madam.
Great. Well, thank you for hearing us out. So we worked very hard all year long, and our committee has come up with recommendations for town meeting to vote on, and I thought you'd be interested to know that we started with 20 requests this year for over $5 million. It was our usual challenge. Luckily, some of them pulled out and made better decisions, and they'll be back in the future. Unless you all ask for it, I don't want to read through the ones we did not vote for. I think they'll be back in many cases. In some cases, they just weren't either appropriate for us or weren't ready to start their project. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them, but we don't want to leave the impression that losers, you didn't make the list. So they're here if anybody wants to see them after the meeting. So your first page, your profit, these are the funds that we've given since '03 in the beginning. We were one of the first communities to join CPA, and jumped right in. It took a year for us to vote on it in town and start the process of collecting funds. And so our first gifting out as a town was in 2003. And you've got the amounts in front of you. The total so far, not counting what we're asking for this year, is $23,305,000. It's a huge impact on our community, and every year that goes by, we can see it more visibly all around town. You can see the percentages on the right. The open space is 58% of all that we've given out so far. That's thrown off a bit by the Lerner property, which was $5 million. So, but even if you take the $5 million out, it's still $8 million. It's still twice as much as any of the other categories. And I've been told, although I wasn't here at the time, that when the town voted to be part of CPA, that was their number one priority, was save some of the open space in town. So we're doing very well in that category. The second, historic preservation, again, that one includes the museum payment of $1.1 million for the Heritage Museum. But still, we're doing fairly well with heritage, with the historic preservation. Community housing is the outlier. You can see that we have some catching up to do there, with only 10.7% of all of our funds going to affordable housing. You'll see this year that it was, again, our largest donation for this year. We're trying to catch up. Some of that falling behind took place because we didn't have the trust in place. The selectmen voted on that later. That's been very effective in producing more units of affordable housing. So we give them as much as we can every year, try to catch them up. Recreation is a new category for us. It's not sort of a full community member. They don't get the 10% like the top three do, but they still are at 8%. And the administrative budget is what it is. It's salaries, paper clips, so forth. That doesn't change. Any questions on that first page? These numbers do include the debt service payment for the Heritage Museum and the Lerner property. And that's the way it turns out. Okay, the next page is CPC recommendations for this year. And Larry and I will go through them and tell you about each one. There was a question about how much they asked for versus how much we were able to give them. And in a very limited budget, as we said, over $2 million in requests, the funding for this year, minus the commitments we have to pay off those two loans, brought us down to $725,000 to appropriate for this year. So the total amount for the town collection and the state collection, and a little bit of returned funds, I'm on page 3 right now, brought us to a budget of $1,293,000. And if you take out $567,000 for payments on debt service, that brings us down to spending cash of $725,000. Again, remember, we're well over $2 million in requests. So, okay, back to 2. These are the projects we'll be going through. Let's see, the administrative fund is exactly what they've asked for. That's a rotating fund. There are years when we use a little bit more than we have, and we've got some in reserve. Other years, it's not as much as we actually need, and that's okay. So it builds up. The Affordable Housing Trust asked for $350,000. We were able to finance them to $300,000. Again, because of so many good projects this year. Liberty Plains Cemetery asked for $24,000. We gave them $19,000 just because we didn't have it. Memorial Bell Tower is just what they had asked for. Old Ordinary Stabilization Fund originally asked for $70,000. We were able to give them $29,000. Athletic Field Study asked originally for $50,000, then recalled that they should probably add all the outdoor tennis courts, and so it brought it up to $60,000.
And basketball courts.
And basketball courts, that's right. So we're going to have a complete inventory of all those. Bathhouse Concession Stand asked for $96,000, recalculated and felt safer at $120,000. Plymouth River School Playground Improvements asked for $88,000. We were able to give them $24,000. Okay, now to page 3. So what this is where's the income coming in? Our revenue comes from the town collection of over $1 million. State contribution of almost $200,000 this year. It's dropping every year. More cities and towns are joining CPA. Our share is getting smaller and smaller. Some returned funds that we clawed back from a project that didn't need it all and didn't finish up. And so our spending amount this year was $1,293,000, and then you take away the debt service, and that brings us down to $725,000. So here's how it breaks out in terms of historic categories. That's sort of self-explanatory, I guess. Okay, so the first one is the Community CPC Administrative Fund. And this is Carol and part-time Roger's salary. It's what makes us function. We couldn't be there without them. And we're allowed to go up to 5% according to the CPA Act, and we have kept it well below that. It's part-time salaries, legal fees, which range from $10,000 one year to nothing the next year. It depends on what we need done. State coalition fees, which have gone up a lot. They're now over $4,000. Supplies and miscellaneous. So $50,000 isn't negotiable. That's kind of just what it is.
And do you have to join the state coalition?
We wouldn't have to, we'd be pretty lost. And what we give them also goes to supporting all their research and record keeping. They have a wonderful online research service and so forth. It's worth it.
We also have to call them a lot to make
Yes.
sure we're doing things correctly, procedural,
Yeah.
and that we're considering things in a correct procedural way, and we need them all the time.
Saves us from calling our lawyer.
Yeah.
They don't charge us by the hour. Nothing personal. Okay, page. I will point out, we have 4 lovely lawyers on our committee this year. Couldn't live without them. Larry's going to talk about affordable housing.
So we have to give 10% of everything available to affordable housing. That's the rule. So that would have been 124 and change. They asked for 350. We were able to see our way to 300. And just to put it into context, they have 400 right now. So, no, they have 350 right now. Us giving them 300 will give them 650. And it's an opportunity fund, which means if a house or a property came along during the year, they could jump on it and make it available for affordable housing. And the committee just felt, no matter what else we help pay for, it is so important to bring people into the town who otherwise might not be able to afford it. And that was a big priority for us.
So I watched a little of this back and forth. I'm not sure I followed it all correctly, because it sounded like, maybe you're talking about this 350. It sounded like they had to give some money back to you, but then you were going to give it back to them. You don't have to get into all the weeds, but
It was money we were clawing back because they were not able to move forward on a project that had to do with the Selectmen's parcel. The money was there for them, and for lots of reasons they couldn't go forward. It was
and is that part of that 47 you talked about being clawed back, or is that a different?
No, it's a different one. This was much more, and we actually had gifted that as part of the big chunk we gave them last year. What was it, 468 or something like that?
Okay.
So that, we had already given that to them.
The numbers I just gave you is with the field weeded and fertilized.
Okay. Well, I sit, I have the opportunity to sit as a member now of the Affordable Housing Trust, so one of us rotating is a member of the trust, and, you know, I'm not sure I fully appreciated the importance of having resources available to sort of strike when an opportunity presents itself. There's no time to be able to come to a funding source, and, you know, at that point, you've lost the ability to participate in the process.
That's it.
And so, you know, I do think, to your point, having fairly significant resources available, it is really makes the housing trust more effective.
If you were to look in their account at the town hall, you'd see like 700,000, but it's encumbered. It's put aside for specific, it's like you do your household, you know, this pocket's for something and that's pocket for something else, and it's for housing that they're already working on. The one out at the end of Cushing Street, they may be able to put a second house on that property. So they have to put some money aside to do that. But when their funding gets down to a couple $100,000, it's time for us to step in again.
And I
they're
know we've
doing really good
talked in the
work.
past about, you know, CPC, typically you have a 2-year horizon on spending dollars. And I think one of the things we've talked about is that with affordable housing, it takes a while to accumulate those dollars. And so I appreciate that this opportunity funding doesn't have a time attached to it, because, you know, when you think about it, $600,000 or $700,000 doesn't go very far in this community anymore. And so, you know, it's having the sufficient funds available to act on these opportunities. So we kind of have to, we have to set aside that money over a couple of years.
And we get a lot of questions about, having met the 10%, what is this about? And the fact is, we have another number to catch up to in years to come, and plus it's the right thing to do.
And I think this board has talked about, achieving the 10% subsidized housing inventory doesn't mean we're out of the affordable housing business, but rather it means that we can continue to do it on our own terms. And that's where this is so important, because it gives us the ability to provide affordable housing to, and I think an important aspect of affordable housing is that the units themselves fit within the character of the neighborhood that they sit in. This gives that opportunity, and it also means that geographically around Hingham, we can advance our housing stock throughout the town. So all good things.
The next is the Liberty Plain Cemetery, jokingly called Phase 4. It's been going on a long time. And it's gravestone, so nothing's ever done. Nothing's ever the final phase. It will keep on going for quite a long time. But for this year, because of all the demands on our funding, we were not able to give Gary Tundorf Dick the money that he really needed. He's going to have to cut back on his expectations for this year. But this is conservators who come in and repair the stones, the gravestones and the footstones. They do work on to conserve the veterans' historical markers. If you've never stopped in up there, it's a wonderful walk. Go through there. They're beautiful specimen trees. The stones go way back into the 1700s. And he has everything completely documented. He has before and after pictures and write-ups of every little thing that was done to those stones. So it's wonderful. And as he says, at this phase, he thinks he's about done. Then he looks around. Some of the oldest ones are starting to go now, too. So this was, I thought it'd be interesting to see how much they've used up there so far. But when you see the work he's done, it's very impressive. And, of course, they can only work in the summer. They can't take them home and work on them in their shop. They have to sit there on the grass and do it that way. And he's found very good people, and he checks out prices, and he does competitive bidding and does a very nice job. We're lucky to have him doing all this. So that was sort of a no-brainer. I wish we could have given him the total amount, but they'll keep going over the years. Bell Tower?
So the bell tower came to us last year and asked us for the money to repair all 10 bells, and we couldn't see our way to doing it. So we gave enough money to repair 2 bells, and the Historic Commission through the Greenbush Fund gave enough money to restore 2 bells. But we said in their award last year, it was very lawyerly language, but it was something like, we will be inclined to look favorably on your request if you come back next year, which was a way of saying if we can, we will. We're not making any promises, but we won't forget you. And we didn't forget them. And they came back and wanted money not only to fix the 6 bells, but to fix the ropes on the bells, which were a separate issue. And if they do everything at once and hire the crane just once, the price of the whole thing is cheaper. And we felt, let's just give them their whole ask, which was $121 and change. The bells were originally put in 1912. It's now 2019, so we're going to be dead the next time they come back for more money. So we just figured, let's be done with it.
Maybe you are, Larry.
Yeah, I will be. You guys will still, you can grapple with it in 21-19.
And the head bell ringer, Dave Cushing, pointed out that you wouldn't tune half a piano. And when these get fixed, it's a mechanism. The bells are in perfect shape. They look just like they were when they were made. But and they come from Hingham, England. They are replicas of bells from Hingham, England, made by the same foundry, whose name escapes me, that made the Liberty Bell and Big Ben. Wonderful old, these are terrific. They have sayings written on them, and they're just beautiful. And I would like to propose that the Hingham students in the 5th grade who now go to see the Old Ordinary, like clockwork every year, they need a trip up the bell tower. It's, I bet half of the seniors don't know that exists, and it's really special.
And the bell ringers, they're an earnest group.
Yes.
They want to share. And if you live near downtown, it's beautiful.
They got biceps. Like
Absolutely.
that. Okay, so this will completely finish them up now for now. As the crane falls down.
That's an easy one.
Okay, Old Ordinary Stabilization Plan. For those of you who are members of the Historical Society, you're watching with great interest as Deirdre Anderson has taken that place and shot it off like a rocket. It's unbelievable what's going on down there. So her vision for the Old Ordinary, the 1688 Old Ordinary Museum, is to turn it into a complex. They're beginning to call it the Old Ordinary campus, because they want to be educational down there, and the 100-year-old annex, 112-year-old annex building is the perfect place to make the educational center of that whole complex. So it'll be the Old Ordinary, it'll be what we still call John Richardson's house, but it's one of the 3 original old forts in town, and then the kids can go into the annex, which has plumbing and running water and heat and electricity and everything, and that's where they can hold classes and be taught the history of the area. So she has a lot of needs. They're looking at a $350,000 project over time. We were able to give them almost $30,000 this year, which, as I understand it, her salient issue is getting the annex up off of its foundation where it's basically rotting, and put some sort of cap layer in there, setting it back down. If they don't do it pretty quickly, they're going to lose it. There's obvious rot, and they'll be rebuilding the old building if they don't get to this soon. So that's what's going on right now, but it's part of a much bigger plan.
What was that total ask then on the
70.
70?
They asked 70. She started at 100 and then really looked at our numbers and said, whoops, let's try for 70. So 29 will help them out. They're going to every source they can find. Larry's helped them come up with some more sources to apply to, but they'll get it together, and it's going to be magnificent when it's all done.
Will the 29 be sufficient to do the necessary stabilization, or will that only be?
That's combined with some funds they already have and others are going for.
So this
It's
is a
an
good
ongoing-
question. They're actually going to leverage this money going after a matching grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Commission, which is terrific. And I think they're in a good position to get money from Mass Cultural Council, not Commission. And but they will only give half. They'll match dollar for dollar. So every dollar they get from us enables them to go for another dollar from MCC. So they're on it.
So in terms of their ability to get the money they need to do the necessary stabilization, are you optimistic that they'll be able to pull together the necessary funds, or are you concerned about that?
Yes, but it is only one part of what they need to do. There's work in the Old Ordinary that needs doing too. But this was her big concern right now, to get to this before it turned into a much bigger, more expensive project.
I would say cautiously optimistic,
Yeah.
because they have to go not just for grants and not just for money from CPC, but they're still going to have to do some plain old private fundraising too.
Mm-hmm.
And is this one of those situations where if they don't come up with the necessary funds to get to $70,000, you don't release the 29,921 unless they can
They have to
undertake
have
the
it already,
project,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
We just pay the bills.
Right.
Okay. Athletic fields. So
Is there a maximum amount that the state would pay, would match? In other words, if the state would match this 29,000 ideally?
I don't know that, do you?
The state would definitely match 29,000 and much more than that. But in fact, they're going for a much higher match. I forget the exact number right now, but they're allowed to use for their match some money that they got from CPC last year. And I think they may have gotten some Mass Historical Commission money so they have some monies amassed already to go for a match in addition to this 29,000, and that match can go very high, well into the six figures.
I don't know what the top number is,
but it's not 29. They're well within range, if that's your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether, if someone's going to match it, if it's worthwhile increasing it.
When they go after Greenbush money too, it's you're going to bundle it all until they have enough to get going on it.
And what the state, if the state gives them a match that's more than they actually can accumulate on their end, the state won't take away the whole match. They'll just match whatever is matchable. So it's not a if the state awards the money, they can't lose if they don't get all of the match. They'll get as much of the match as they can come up with.
Okay, the athletic field study. So Mark Thorell came to us with this idea that's been kicked around a long time of coordinating the fields around town, owned by the town, and it would include the school fields, the rec fields, I don't know who's in charge of all of them. But the problem is if they get a rainy day on a field and can't play, right now we put our kids in buses and take them to Hanover or another town with a dry field. There's no coordination and no system really to let them know where the good fields are and when they need repair. There needs to be a schedule set up of when they need work. So this originally came to us as a proposal to bring a professional in to evaluate all the fields in town and set them up on a schedule and an easy way to access them and know what's being used at any given time. And then they realized, while you're out there, guys, also look at the outdoor tennis courts, the outdoor basketball courts, which makes a lot of sense too. So it's all the outdoor athletic facilities. They started at 50,000, and when they realized they needed all the courts and everything looked at it, came up to 60,000. We just felt very strongly as a committee that this was just a really good idea. We've heard for years that they couldn't get this pulled together, they couldn't get it organized. They're not even sure exactly how many fields are in working order and what needs to get repaired from year to year. This will be a money saver. It may even save us from having to produce more fields in the future if we're more aware of what's out there and how it be used. And it'll be set up as a system. Someone will be in charge of knowing what conditions the fields are in at all times and what's available for each team. So it makes a lot of sense to us, and they're going to bring in an independent expert to do this so that it's not all the different players trying to figure it out on their own. This will be somebody who does this for a living.
So you and I talked about this, Tom and I have talked about this a little bit. These field assets, including tennis courts and outdoor basketball courts, are assets of the town that, it strikes us that it's important to have an accurate inventory of. It's important to have an accurate description of the condition and an accurate sort of assessment of what it takes to kind of keep these fields playable. It's an asset just like any other asset we own in town, and you're absolutely right. I think we've been struggling with how best to approach this for several years, in part because the way the field sort of stewardship obligations are divided up in town. There are, different groups that sort of own and operate different fields in town. And so, I view this as really essential for those three stewards to come together and to work with somebody whose job it is to understand these kinds of assets and to produce some information that then we can all synthesize. I think the process piece of this, I've heard some folks ask questions about this. I think we view the process piece of this as involving the staff of the schools, the rec department, and the Board of Selectmen, together with working through the Hingham Sports Partnership to identify a citizen volunteer to help that group kind of come up with the front end questionnaire kind of part of this. So to go out to the various user groups to get an understanding of their needs and assessments of the use of these assets, so to make sure that we're gathering the information on the front end that helps produce a product on the back end that then we can all utilize, both in an individual capacity and potentially in a collective capacity. So, as Carol said, there may be I don't have any preconceived notions for this, but I think it's long overdue, and it strikes me that it's helpful to involve a professional component here. To, again, assess this asset just like any other asset we own in town. So,
in Hingham, we're big planners, and we like to do master plans.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
The planning board is talking about a master plan. We've done master plans on buildings. We should do them on our fields and all of our athletic facilities. I think, at least for me, when things come across, you're sort of relying on anecdotal data, and I know there are times when, my kids are playing on a field where I think, gosh, Hingham could do better than this. And there are times when I drive by a field and I think, boy, I haven't seen anybody out there in a long time.
Yeah.
And I think we're all relying on our anecdotal data, and I like the idea of somebody looking to say, these are the collective things. I also remember when I was on the advisory committee that there was some discussion at the time around, are we utilizing all of the athletic field spaces appropriately? So, for example, the field spaces at the elementary school. I live near the middle school. They're beautiful fields. So I think to the extent that we, going forward, want to ask the taxpayers of Hingham to invest in the maintenance or potential expansion of our facilities, we need to demonstrate to them that we're taking care of what we have, And I think we need to give them data on usage, because otherwise, everybody's going to rely on their own experience in the town, and then all of a sudden, we're all talking like this. You know, we may have different opinions about where we should be investing, but if we have a common set of facts, I think it's a much more constructive conversation.
And the addition of the basketball and tennis courts, and the advisory committee can appreciate this. I can recall being on advisory committee, and every year almost as a capital outlay question was, okay, and then we got to fix these tennis courts. And at one point, I'm like, how many tennis courts do we have, and how many do we need, and how are people using them? And if, you know, again, so that when this opportunity came up, you know, I think we saw an opportunity to add in something we wouldn't do independently. So let's go out and at least get an inventory of the courts and some assessment of the condition they're in. And basketball courts, you know, probably to a lesser extent, but still, you know, I think there are assets that kids and adults use. These assets, you know, just like the other attributes, I think, that are funded by CPC, these are some of the things that make Hingham, and I think our recreational assets are part of that.
And just for the folks at home, we're talking about something like 50 acres of fields. It's not a tiny amount of land. It's a lot of different land. And it's a lot of, oh, it's girls soccer here on Saturday? I thought it was men's softball here on Saturday. And there's a lot of bottlenecking. And the different groups that control the fields recognize that they haven't been able to untangle this and need an arm's length assessment to get it figured out.
The next one is the bathhouse concession stand. And if you feel like you've been hearing about this for many years, it's because you have. But we have light at the end of the tunnel. They're back to us for another $120,000. It may be a little more than they really need, but they've got to, they've got to be aware of any contingencies that might come along. So what you've got in front of you is where the sources are for the funding they got. It was first $700,000 from the Seaport Economic Council, and in order to get that, CPC had to give them, was it 15% or something, a grant of $150,000 so they could get the Seaport money. Then the town appropriated $350,000, so they're at $1.2 million right now, and if we give them another $120,000, they'll be at $1,320,000. Now, why has this gone up? And the first thing you need to know is that in this 2 to 3 years that we've been doing all this planning and trying to figure out where to place it, and is it wetland or not, and all of this, the cost of construction's gone up 20%. So if you're putting a garage in your house right now, you already know that. It's going up as fast as they can keep up with it. The second thing is the permitting turned out to be $50,000 more than they thought, because it is near the ocean. That's controlled by a whole different set of entities, and flooding concerns and all of that. So the permitting was a lot more. They originally were told by the architect they thought it would be about $950,000. When they put it out to bid, the low bid was $1.1 million. So, shocker. And because of that, they looked into modular construction. So when you go in the building, you won't see the difference, and you look at it from the outside, it's still shingles and looks exactly like you would expect it to look, but it's going to come in big chunks already made, and it makes the foundation a little bit more simple. And the low bid on that came in from Triumph Modular, who is already working on it. They've signed up with Fire King, which is the owner of Tosca's, who will be providing the food, and they are becoming very good partners with us. To cut back on costs, they originally said they were going to have to take off the outdoor deck, which is too bad. How fun to get your snack and sit out on the deck looking at the water. And Fire King said, you know, that's important to us. We'll build it for you. They're paying for the deck. They are also in charge of keeping all the bathrooms cleaned. They're bringing in all their own cooking equipment, so that saved us a fortune. You should know, too, that 6% of the gross profits from this will go to the town, not to the trustees of Bathing Beach, but to the town, to be figured out where you're going to put that. Maybe kill off more Canada geese with it, or whatever they do down there. You can always use it. So that's where they are. They're asking for another $120,000. We made it clear we don't want to ever see their smiling faces again, so this may be. But Just like that? It's good, just like those exact words. And I can't wait. It's supposed to be done in June. I think it's going to be very exciting and a great asset for the town. Any questions on that one? Plymouth River School. So this is sort of our tough one. We had 2 members of the school committee come to us and say, because of the vast number of unfunded mandates that they live with, that they are in need for more funding because the state has just said that the federal government requires so many inches of squishy bark mulch under all the playgrounds. But the state of Massachusetts has now decided that's not good enough. We need that poured rubber, bouncy, mushy stuff, whatever it is called. And so they're having to convert all the schools in Hingham around to that material. They've done some, they're in the process of doing South School right now. This is the Plymouth River Playground. If your kids weren't lucky enough to go to Plymouth River, you're missing out. It's a wonderful school, and the playground is terrific. But they do need to get this new poured rubbery stuff down, or they will start getting fined. The state law will only give them so much time to get this done. So the question for us was not, how important are playgrounds, or how much do we love our children, or do kids need outdoor exercise and that kind of thing. The question for us was, why us? Why does this come to CPC? Why isn't this a line item in the school budget, which it actually is? So the $53 million school budget would normally be paying for this, but they came to us because it's going to make that playground ADA compliant. Wheelchair kids can get in and play on the equipment. Besides putting the squishy stuff down for safety, they want to add and upgrade a few pieces of equipment for handicapped children. And our committee feels pretty strongly that that's a really good mission to help them with that. It was tough because I made the plea that this could start a slippery slope. And we can just imagine years from now pieces of the school committee budget coming to us on a regular basis, and their budget's 50 times bigger than ours, so that didn't make a lot of sense. But enough of the people on the committee felt compelled to do this for them that it got voted through.
Carol, the original request for 88, so
$88,000.
what did that encompass?
It's the rubbery stuff all over, and as Vicki Dowland points out, when you're swinging and fall, you don't fall under the swing. You fall out there. So it has to be a pretty wide space that's covered by this squishy stuff. And then there are other pieces of equipment that aren't all in the one little rectangular play area. It's about this big. They're sort of off to the side. So then they want paths that will go up there. And it's also upgrading some of the equipment that's there to make it handicap accessible.
Did the committee, you mentioned that other schools have complied with this requirement. Did you discuss at all the source of funding for those efforts?
Larry asked that good question. Some of the schools just closed the playgrounds. I think it was.
Which ones?
Duxbury or Cohasset?
I think
Cohasset just
So in
said,
Hingham, I'm sorry, so the, in Hingham, are other elementary schools, do we know whether they have the same situation, or have they complied with the ADA requirements?
it's different schools,
I think east and south are in compliance,
or about to be.
I'm not sure about Foster, but Foster's like a whole other ball of
Sure.
wax.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait on Foster.
And with south and east, do we have a sense of how those were funded? I mean, I remember, I'm a former South parent, and I remember a couple of years of PTO raising money for playground. I can't remember what exactly it went for.
What they told us is they're shifting around priorities within the capital budget. So, for instance, the back windows in the Plymouth River School need to be replaced. This has been going on for years. They have to do this first, and then they can do the windows. But if we can step in and help with the funding, it's hard. It's a very hard decision to make.
I guess when I think about CPC, I think of how it came to Hingham and how we've used it. It's been with the idea of funding important things in our community that don't have other funding sources, or that we know in the operating budget might not make it through because other times there are things that are just higher priority. For example, mandates, right? We have, all our budgets have them. And, as we were looking at things like acquiring land and preserving history, those things don't necessarily make it through the operating budget process because we've got firefighters to put on the street, we've got snow to plow off roads. And what I'm struggling with this is not that it's a bad idea, but it has a funding source. And it feels to me like this is morphing part of the school budget into CPC. And I worry that if we do it with one, other things are going to creep in. I love what we've done with playgrounds around Hingham. Many of the playgrounds that we've done with CPC are accessible to the community at all hours of the day. When I think of, I just got the school budget request, and it's a $3 million increase to get it up to $56 million. There's $1 million of capital. This one, I think it's a great idea. I'm just not really sure it fits in CPC. I think about some of the other things you've said no to or that you've pared back that don't maybe have the funding sources. And frankly, in the school budget every year, when we get the budget, there's a whole list of mandates, and they all just kind of sail through. I don't know why we're kind of carving out a playground for this, because there are many mandates in the education budget.
I must tell you that I made basically the same plea to my committee. And we struggled with it.
Sure.
And the fact that it looks like a 9-0 vote is because Larry and I and another 2 people kind of gave in and balanced. It's like, you want the wall and I want the kids out of the cages. It was one of those, somebody's going to win. So we gave in.
Well,
Just got back from DC.
CPC feels your vexation. So the way we operate is, there are 9 people on the committee, and we look for a majority of 5 to arrive at the same number. What we do is we vote at home in private, and then come in and look at how we voted, and then talk and hash it out and re-vote. 4 people came in and voted 0, and 5 people voted different amounts. I think only 1 or 2 voted the full ask. And then, as Carol says, we compromised, and that's what happened. But it was probably our most vexing one.
And with government and what we're all here for, we all compromise as part of this, because if we didn't compromise, I'm glad we're not voting on this tonight.
I share your unease with this issue. And I'd also remind the committee that this board negotiated $1 million payment to Windows at Plymouth River.
Oh, you did?
Yes, they came in a few years ago looking for $2 million. Their energy costs were 3%. We said no. We had an opportunity with respect to Alliance for mitigation payment.
Well, I just checked
Record
today.
there, so I mean, these guys are, I don't know.
It was hard. I checked today, and it turns out that after you all vote, and after AdCom votes, which are different meetings, we have the right to go back and meet again and rethink. So it's a possibility. I don't know, all my committee isn't here tonight, and we need to do a lot of talking about this. And where it was such a close vote, it might not take much to push it over. But I know where I'd put the funds, but I'm sure everybody else does too. So we'll wait and hear from you all.
Were any of the other votes that, even though they say 9-0, were they tight, close? Did
Most
you
of them were
halt, or-
unanimous. Yeah,
Except
we
this
were
one.
pretty close on some of them, but this was the one. that-
Well, most of the votes were unanimous because compromises were reached. I mean,
Yeah.
it was that last session we had where we hashed out the money, it was, and the AdCom people who were there can vouch for this, it was a really productive, rigorous and vigorous meeting, and if you see unanimous votes, it's because people felt they gave something, but they got something. It was pretty, we were proud of ourselves.
My memory, though, is that in the past, I've seen, a fair number of split votes, so that's what my immediate interest is when I read these proposals.
Made even harder by the fact that the advocates are sitting in the audience.
Up front, it was
We're talking
an
about their
absolutely
projects.
That's a
split
cost of
vote.
doing business.
Up front, the vote was split.
And again, I think compromise and everything is good. I guess, to me, this is opening up CPC to be funding projects like this down the road. And I'm not sure that's when the town adopted CPC, and I realize recreation wasn't there, but I go back to thinking that the intent of CPC is to fund things that wouldn't otherwise get funded. And I don't think this is one of those things.
And, just to echo my colleague's concerns, I was going to ask you
I'm there on that, too.
whether, whether there was anything else like this that we funded in the past, because that was my immediate concern as well.
Not really. We do a lot of ADA compliance in
General.
churches that we wouldn't fund necessarily, that sort of thing. When you start talking about handicapped kids, it's extremely compelling. And that was what turned a lot of people on the committee, even though I kept saying this is not what we usually do. Oh, but the kids, it's pulling at heartstrings.
Every mandated item in the school budget that has come to this board since I've been serving has been funded. So I just look and say, I don't think it's this bucket, I think it's this other bucket. And the good news is, that other bucket.
We got a bucket.
We got a bucket. And we haven't talked about that bucket yet.
For what it's... Nice. For what it's worth, we put the question to the school committee, what would you do? And they said we would find a way to fund it. I mean, they
Rearrange your priorities.
The danger is, right, this is a really, really compelling project, right? And the danger is that the bigger asks crowd out these small, unique projects that, like Mary said, they're not going to get any traction anywhere else. And that's the concern I would have, would be, could we afford this? You did afford it. You sounds like you went through a rigorous analysis of the money that you had, and you've allocated every dollar the best way you can. But my concern would be kind of starting a pattern of this begins to crowd out projects that otherwise don't have a chance. They're not as maybe as sort of emotionally compelling, or they're not as sophisticated, but to me, part of what the CPC does is fund these projects that make us who we are, that we wouldn't be able to afford. It doesn't belong in any particular line item, but it has a home here, and I would be concerned about crowding those out.
And we're seeing that. We've, in a way, I think CPC has picked the low-hanging fruit in town. Who could say no to the Historical Society's Heritage Museum? Who could say no to the Lehner property? But this year we had two beautiful parcels of land that we really wanted. They're uniquely attractive land. We couldn't go near them. I mean, we just can't borrow anymore. We really have hit our peak for borrowing until after this year, there's 2 more years of paying off the museum, and then that will open another gap of money, but we just can't take on more borrowing.
Town said no to land acquisition.
What's this?
Town said no to land acquisition, to Baker property on Main Street. That was a spirited discussion.
Yeah.
I would also, it's interesting to me to see that every year, even though we have invested $23 million, you're still getting $5 million of requests every year. And I guess the other thing I'd point out is the state match is dropping down. It looks like it's about 20 cents on the dollar. There's also, no rule that says we have to spend every dollar we collect in a year, because next year that match is probably going to be less than what it is. And as you're trying to, as Karen said, find creative ways to fund these different things, your job is going to get harder as time goes on, because there still will be these projects, and we may not have that state match. I would also remind us that the lion's share of these projects are funded with taxpayer dollars. So, this isn't free money. This is this is our money.
Your points are well taken and duly noted.
Thank you. Comments from the audience? But before you do that, my friend, you have to go up to the podium there and identify yourself by name and address.
I thought there were questions from the floor, pardon me. I'm just curious
Could you
about
identify yourself by name and
Oh, yeah,
address?
my name is Ed Gatos. I'm on the advisory committee. I'm a new member of the advisory committee.
Welcome.
I'm just curious, speaking of small projects, about the historical records requests that did
Yes.
not get funded.
That did not pass this year. It's an ongoing project that Andrea Young has done for years, and in the past, they were one-of-a-kind, sort of priceless books about the history of Hingham, early recordings of land deeds and marriages, and things that were just wonderful. And she can only do, sort of like the gravestones, she can only do so many per year because our archivist can only do that number. This year, she brought to us copies of wonderful old records that the Boston Library has, and while there are the town's copies, they're also on the internet. And they're research pieces, and they're wonderful. She showed us through them. The committee, in a tight year, just decided maybe take a year off. Those are things that you can get to another way. It would be great to bind them, but it just didn't get voted through.
And they're not originals.
Not originals, yeah.
The
copies.
originals are at the Boston Public Library. And as a Hinghamite, you don't have to go to Boston. They're online. They're available to you with a click.
Very hard to turn down a lot of these projects. There were others that just weren't ready, they weren't shovel-ready. And there were others who didn't get permission from the land they needed to use. And they'll be back. What are some of the others? I mean, they're all good, and they're all worthy. It's just a matter of, are they ready? One thing the committee doesn't like to do is put out funding and hold it for a project that doesn't get the shovels out for another couple years, and that causes problems. You're holding money back that could go to something else. So we look a lot at how quickly will this start and get done, what benefit is it to the town, but there were a lot we had to turn down this year.
Is there anyone else who'd like to say anything before we part? Mr. Curley, how are you tonight?
Good, Mr. Gill.
Good.
Bob Curley, 1 Gristmill Lane. Just a point of information with respect to Karen's question about other projects. There was one other project involving the schools, which was CPC funds used to move the girls' softball field during the Hingham High School Fields project that the school committee came to the CPC for. There was maybe less of a debate at the time, but that's the only one I can think of, and it's probably because it was only after the recreational purpose for CPC funds came in.
And I think I was on AdCom when that field project came about, and I think we looked at the total, that was I think it was a $6 million project, raised $1 million. The Hingham Sports Partnership led an effort to raise $1 million. I think what we kind of looked at with CPC was to say, are there some extras in that project that wouldn't get funded otherwise because it was such a big project? And so I think when that $50,000 was allotted, it wasn't so much that particular part of the project, but I think the idea was there are some things that there were some extras that wouldn't have happened anyway, that we thought were that were important to the project, that given its size, it was difficult to be funded. So
That was my recollection as well, because I think I was the chair that year, actually, and I think part of what we were doing was looking around to mitigate the impact on taxpayers of that major capital project, and to sort of look at any number of funding sources in addition to private philanthropy to come to the table to support, again, a major multifaceted capital project for the town. So I think it's helpful, and Paul just said it's so important to have the institutional knowledge when you're considering this sort of stuff. But I not to put too fine a point on it, I would differentiate that a little bit from a discrete ask for something like this, but thank you.
Carol, Carol, could you just mention the names of the rest of the Community Preservation Committee? Because
Oh, sure.
I think some people are here, but you've got some new faces, and they...
This is Lori Lerner, who's the vice chairman this year. Larry pulled together the project that is now the Ames Chapel, if you don't recognize it. Carol Costello is our assistant from DPW. Jim Watson represents the Housing Authority. And Bob Mosier came on from Conservation. And I can't see who else is here.
Kevin?
Kevin Burke is one of my 4 lawyers. We all talk about our lawyers, who represents the Historic Committee. And anybody else that's here? No, we also have Bill Harrington, another lawyer, and Dan White, another lawyer, and Jen Gay Smith, another lawyer.
And Vicki Donlin.
And Vicki Donlin from Recreation. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Well represented.
Yes, we are.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for
Thank
coming
you.
in. Thank you for that presentation, Carol and Larry.
Really, really great
informative.
work.
Appreciate
Great
the work.
work, thank you.
Appreciate the effort. All right. Well, you don't have to go home. You can stay here. 'Cause unless there's anything my colleagues would like to add, I think we're ready to take a motion to adjourn. So on that note, I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye. Good night, everybody.